Have you ever wondered what it would be like to find love in a world without privacy, where every courtship was a public performance? A world where your heart was not your own to give, but a strategic asset belonging to your family, your lord, and your king. It is a place far removed from our own, yet it holds a fascinating mirror to the enduring human quest for connection. Tonight, we're going to step back in time to explore that very world, moving beyond the fairy tales of knights and castles. As we settle in for our story, I'm always so curious to know where you're all listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Please feel free to share in the comments below. It's wonderful to think of our community scattered all across the globe. For now, just find a comfortable spot, let your worries drift away, and prepare for our journey. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep. Tonight, we'll begin by exploring the unwritten rules and unspoken truths that governed the intricate dance of medieval courtship. Let us begin in a world lit by candle and firelight, a world where alliances were the bedrock of survival. In this time, marriage was not the culmination of a romance. It was the beginning of a negotiation. It was the primary, most powerful tool of diplomacy and statecraft available to the ruling classes. A wedding was far more important than a war. A successful match could achieve what armies never could, uniting rival kingdoms and ending generations of bloodshed without a single sword being drawn. A failed match, however, could plunge a continent into conflict. For the men and women of the medieval nobility, the marriage market was the great stage upon which their destinies were decided. Imagine a great hall, its stone walls softened by the rustle of a heavy tapestry. This tapestry does not just depict a hunting scene. It shows a family's entire lineage, a constant and silent reminder of the importance of bloodlines. In this hall, a powerful lord sits at a great oak table. Spread before him are not love letters, but maps. His fingers, heavy with rings, trace the borders of his lands, then drift across to the lands of a neighbor. He is not thinking of the happiness of his daughter. He is thinking of the river that separates his domain from another, of the fertile fields and the strategic castle that could be his if the right union were forged. This was the cold, hard arithmetic of medieval marriage. It was a transaction, a merger of assets. Central to this transaction was the idea of wardship. When a lord died, leaving behind an underage heir, or even more valuably, an heiress, the child did not simply remain with their mother. Their guardianship, and with it the right to arrange their marriage, fell to their feudal overlord. The king, a duke, or a powerful baron would suddenly hold the future of this young life in his hands. An orphaned girl, rich in land but lacking a father's protection, became one of the most valuable political assets in the kingdom. Her hand in marriage was a prize to be sold to the highest bidder or granted as a reward for loyalty. She was a key to be used to unlock power, and she had almost no say in which door she would open. For ambitious families, the goal was always hypergamy, the art of marrying up. A baron might spend years cultivating favor at court, hoping to secure a duke's daughter for his son. This would elevate his family's status for generations. Conversely, the fear of hypogamy, of marrying down, was a constant shadow. Marrying a daughter to a family of lesser standing could be seen as a sign of weakness, of declining fortunes. It could bring disgrace and diminish the family's influence in the intricate web of feudal power. It was a delicate game of chess, where every move was scrutinized, and a single misstep could mean checkmate. And at the center of this game were the children. The age of marital consent, as defined by the Church, could be as young as 12 for girls and 14 for boys. While many marriages took place when the couple was older, in their late teens or early 20s, this low threshold meant that betrothals, legally binding contracts of future marriage, could be made when they were still in the cradle. A young heiress, long before she could understand what it meant, could be promised to another. Her personal desires, her hopes, her dreams, were almost always secondary to the value of the lands she was destined to inherit. Her life was a chapter in her family's story, not her own. This was because a marriage was never about just two individuals. It was about the merging of two entire kin groups, two families, with all their cousins, vassals, and allies, were now bound together. An insult to one was an insult to the other. A victory for one was a shared triumph. In a room smelling of beeswax and old parchment, fathers and uncles would gather to draw up the marriage contracts. They would argue over every clause, every acre of land. Two key terms dominated these negotiations. The first was the marriage portion, often called the dowry. This was the wealth, in the form of land, money, or valuable goods, that the bride's family paid to the grooms. It was a crucial part of the deal. A large dowry could entice a powerful family to overlook a less prestigious bloodline. A father would feel the heavy weight of gold coins in his palm, calculating the cost of his daughter's future security and his own family's advancement. The second term was the dower. This was the portion of the husband's property that was settled upon the wife for her support should he die before her. For a medieval woman, the dower was her primary source of security in a dangerous world, the guarantee that she would not be left destitute in her widowhood. Underneath all of this diplomacy and finance was a simple, biological imperative: survival. And for a noble house, survival meant procreation. The single most important duty of a wife, especially in the early years of her marriage, was to produce a male heir. A son would carry on the family name, inherit the lands, and preserve the lineage. A string of daughters could be a disaster, each one requiring a dowry that would drain the family's wealth. The pressure to conceive, and to conceive a boy, was immense and unrelenting. It was the fundamental purpose of the union, the ultimate measure of its success. In the murmur of voices in a great hall, as families subtly displayed their eligible sons and daughters during a feast, this was the unspoken question on everyone's mind: can they continue the line? Into this world of cold calculation and strategic alliances, a powerful new force began to assert its authority. The Christian Church looked upon this marriage market and saw something it needed to control, to sanctify, and to regulate. It sought to impose its own rules upon the game, rules that would change the very definition of marriage in Western civilization. The Church decreed that marriage was more than a contract. It was a sacrament, a holy union ordained by God Himself, a sacred bond that reflected the relationship between Christ and His Church. This powerful idea gave the institution of marriage a spiritual weight it had never before possessed, and it gave the Church the ultimate authority to dictate its terms. This authority was wielded with profound effect. In the year 1215, a landmark event took place that sent ripples through the entire social fabric of Europe. At the Fourth Lateran Council, the Church formally decreed a revolutionary idea. For a marriage to be valid in the eyes of God, it required the free and willing consent of both the man and the woman. No longer could a daughter be dragged to the altar against her will, or so the law said. Her words, "I do," had to be spoken freely. This created a fascinating and persistent tension. On one hand, you had the relentless reality of arranged marriages, driven by family strategy. On the other, you had the Church's doctrine of consent, a powerful tool that, in theory, gave even the humblest individual a voice in their own destiny. But the Church's rules did not stop there. It created a complex and bewildering web of forbidden marriages based on kinship. These rules were known as consanguinity, which means relation by blood, and affinity, relation by marriage. At its most extreme, the Church forbade marriage between relatives out to the 7th degree of kinship. This meant you could not marry anyone who shared a common great dash, great dash, great dash, great dash, great dash, great dash grandparent in the small, interrelated communities of the European nobility, where everyone was a cousin to some degree. This made finding an eligible, church-approved partner incredibly difficult. Two families might spend months negotiating a perfect political match, only to discover a distant, shared ancestor that made the union forbidden. To prevent such secret or forbidden unions from taking place, the Church instituted another powerful form of public control: the bans of marriage. For 3 consecutive Sundays, from the pulpit of the local church, the priest would announce the names of the intended bride and groom. Imagine the cold, echoing vastness of a stone cathedral. The priest's voice rings out, declaring the proposed match to the entire community. This was the chance for anyone who knew of a legal or spiritual impediment, a prior promise, or a hidden blood tie, to come forward and speak. It was a system designed to bring all marriages out of the shadows and into the sacred light of public and divine scrutiny. What if a marriage went wrong? What if no heir was produced? Or if the political alliance soured? Endowments were possible, but they were difficult and expensive to obtain. They were not a divorce in the modern sense. Rather, they were a declaration that a valid marriage had never existed in the first place. An annulment could be granted on several grounds. Perhaps the marriage was never consummated. Perhaps one of the parties had a prior binding contract with someone else. Or, most conveniently for the rich and powerful, perhaps a previously unknown blood relation was suddenly discovered between the husband and wife, making their union invalid under the laws of consanguinity. For those with enough wealth and influence, there was a way to bend the rules. A dispensation could be sought from the Pope himself, a special permission to allow a marriage that would otherwise be forbidden. In a chamber lit by flickering candlelight, a scribe would carefully draft the Latin text of a papal dispensation, a document that could make or break dynasties. These dispensations, of course, came at a price, often a very significant donation to the Church. This made it a tool primarily for royalty and the highest nobility, allowing them to make the politically necessary matches that the law of kinship would otherwise deny them. It was another way the Church held enormous power, acting as the ultimate arbiter of succession and legitimacy. Interestingly, while the Church demanded consent and public announcement, it did not, in the early medieval period, require the presence of a priest for a marriage to be considered valid. A simple exchange of vows, spoken in the present tense, was enough. A man and woman, standing at the door of the church, in a field, or even in a tavern, could marry themselves by simply declaring their intent and consent to one another. The sound of a priest's voice, explaining the sacred vows to a young, nervous couple, would become more common over time as the church sought to formalize the ceremony. but the core principle remained. The sacrament was conferred not by the priest, but by the couple themselves. Through this framework of rules, from the grand decree of a council to the intimate exchange of vows, the Church reshaped the landscape of love, family, and power for every Christian in Europe. Now that we understand the great societal and religious forces at play, we can zoom in on the individuals whose lives were shaped by them. Let us consider the world of a noble child, born not into a life of leisure, but of duty. Their existence was a long, carefully planned preparation for the moment they would enter the marriage market. From their earliest years, they carried a heavy burden of expectation. Their personal lives were entirely subordinate to the needs of their lineage, to the continuation of their family's name and power. A noble child's education was designed with this future role in mind. Consider a young girl sitting in a sunlit window seat. She is practicing her embroidery, her small stitches as precise and as carefully planned as the life that has been laid out for her. She is learning to manage a large household, to oversee servants, to understand medicine, and to entertain important guests. These were the arts of being a great lady, the skills she would need to run her husband's castle and support his political ambitions. Out in the courtyard, her brother feels the jarring clang of steel on steel. He is learning to fight, to ride, to hunt, and to manage the family estates. He is being molded into a future lord, a warrior, and a husband who must secure his family's legacy. To further these goals, many noble children were sent away from home for a practice known as fostering. A son might be sent to be raised in the household of his father's lord, or a daughter in the castle of a powerful noblewoman. This was not a sign of uncaring parents. It was a vital part of their education. It built alliances, taught them the complex rules of courtly manners and politics, and expanded their network of personal connections. But it also meant that from a young age, children were acutely aware of their status as pieces in a larger game of family strategy. They learned early that their home was not just a place of comfort, but a seat of power, and that their own lives were part of that power. The pressures on a young lord and a young lady were different, but equally immense. For the young man, his marriage was about two things: securing a male heir and increasing his family's power. He needed a wife from a good family with a handsome dowry, who was known to be healthy and, it was hoped, fertile. For the young lady, her value was a delicate and complex equation. It was tied to her beauty, her reputation, her family's connections, and of course, the lands or wealth she would bring to the union. The fear of scandal was a constant threat. A daughter's tarnished reputation, even through baseless rumor, could ruin her marriage prospects and disgrace her entire family for a generation. Every public appearance was a performance, every word carefully measured. We can almost feel the atmosphere in the evening, the crackle of a great fire in the hall as a father and mother quietly discuss the political advantages of their daughters to suitors. One is richer, but the other has connections to the king. Letters would pass between these noble families, discussing the potential match with the cold calculus of a business merger. They might discuss the health of the young woman, the military prowess of the young man, the fertility of their respective mothers, and the precise details of the dowry. Love was rarely, if ever, part of the written conversation. The system of primogeniture, where the eldest son inherited the entirety of the family's estate, created further pressures. A younger son knew he had to seek his fortune elsewhere. He might enter the church, where he could rise to become a powerful bishop, or he might become a household knight, a professional warrior in the service of another lord. His marriage prospects were far more limited than his older brothers. He needed to marry an heiress or a rich widow to establish his own lands. Daughters also faced a limited set of choices. If a suitable match could not be found, or if her family could not afford a sufficient dowry, she might be sent to a convent. While for some, this was a welcome spiritual calling, for many it was a polite and respectable form of imprisonment, a way to remove an unmarriageable daughter from the board. Imagine being that young woman, dressed in a heavy woolen gown, the fabric constraining and formal. She stands in a great hall, a family crest carved in the stone above the fireplace, a constant, silent symbol of her duty. She knows her entire future is being discussed, negotiated, and decided in rooms she cannot enter and in letters she will never read. This was the profound psychological weight of being a noble child. To be born with great privilege, but with almost no personal freedom. With the stakes so high and the rules so complex, how did the process actually begin? The first moves in the great game of medieval courtship were almost never made by the young people themselves. They were made quietly, strategically, and often through intermediaries. It all began with negotiations between parents, guardians, or feudal lords. A father might hear of a promising young man at court and send a discreet inquiry to the young man's father. Or a king might decide that two of his barons should be allied by marriage to secure a volatile region of the kingdom. In this delicate process, matchmakers were often used. These could be professional agents, but more often they were trusted friends, relatives, or clergy who knew the genealogies, fortunes, and reputations of the various noble families. They could act as a neutral go-between, sounding out a potential match without either family having to formally commit or risk the embarrassment of a refusal. A priest might mention to one lord that another lord has a daughter of marriageable age, and the intricate dance would begin. Sometimes, if the families lived far apart, a proxy would be sent. A trusted knight or a high-ranking lady of the household would be dispatched on a secret mission. Their job was to view the potential bride or groom and report back. They would observe their appearance, looking for signs of good health and strength. They would note their demeanor, their manners, and their reputation. A detailed report would be sent back in a letter sealed with wax. The rustle of that letter being unsealed was a moment of great anticipation, for it could decide the course of the entire negotiation. Portraits were also sometimes exchanged, but these were notoriously unreliable, often painted to be as flattering as possible, concealing flaws and enhancing beauty. The first actual meeting between the prospective couple was almost never a private affair. It was a carefully orchestrated public event. It might be engineered to happen at a major tournament, a royal feast, a large wedding, or a religious festival. These gatherings were the great social stage of the medieval world. Here, families could observe potential partners and their kin from a safe distance without having to show their hand. The vibrant colors of banners and pavilions at a bustling tournament ground provided the perfect backdrop for these subtle inspections. As a herald's trumpet sounds, announcing the names of the noble families arriving at a feast, all eyes are watching. A family's reputation was on full display. The quality of their clothes, the number of their attendants, the richness of their horses, livery, of it was a public declaration of their wealth and status. In the midst of the crowded, noisy hall, a young man might be guided by his father to be formally introduced to a young lady. He might catch a nervous glance from her across the room. Their conversation, if they were allowed any, would be brief, formal, and conducted under the watchful eyes of a dozen relatives and chaperones. They might speak of the weather, or the tournament, or other polite formalities. They were both performing, saying the right things, and trying to make a good impression while being scrutinized from all sides. Even the stars were sometimes consulted. An astrologer might be paid to draw up charts, to determine if a match was written in the stars, and to choose an auspicious date to begin negotiations or celebrate the wedding. And woven through all of this was the constant, quiet hum of gossip. A whisper moving through the court like a breeze could be more powerful than any formal decree. A rumor about a family's hidden debts, a quiet word about a potential bride's sickly constitution, or a story about a young lord's temper could end a prospect before it ever truly began. These first moves were a delicate dance of observation, reputation, and rumor, all setting the stage for the formal courtship that was to follow. It really makes you think, doesn't it? If you were a medieval noble with your family's future on the line, what quality would you value most in a strategic partner? Great wealth, powerful political connections, or vast lands? Let me know your thoughts as we continue our journey. The first moves have been made. Families have assessed one another from afar. Discreet inquiries have been sent, and a potential match has been identified. Now, the quiet calculations of the marriage market give way to the vibrant, noisy, and intensely public performance of medieval courtship. This was not a private romance unfolding in secluded gardens. It was a grand piece of theater, played out upon a stage where every noble was both an actor and a critic, and the audience was the entire world they knew. The intricate dance could now truly begin. The premier stage for this performance was the tournament. We often think of these as mere sporting events, but they were so much more. They were grand social festivals, sometimes lasting for days, that drew in nobles from hundreds of miles around. It was a place for a knight to win fame and fortune, but just as importantly, it was a place to win the attention of a powerful lord or a beautiful lady. Imagine the scene. The air is thick with anticipation. You hear the thunder of hooves on the packed earth and the sharp, splintering crack of a lance shattering against a shield. The crowd roars its approval. Banners bearing the crests of 100 families snap and flutter in the breeze, a riot of bold color against the sky. In this thrilling atmosphere, a young knight could make his intentions known. Before the joust began, he might ride before the stands where the noble ladies were seated. He would single one out, perhaps the lady his family had chosen for him, and dedicate his performance in the lists to her. She, in turn, might grant him her favor. This was a small, personal token, a silk scarf, a ribbon from her dress, or even an entire sleeve. The bright silk of this favor, tied to the knight's helmet or his lance, fluttered as he charged. It was a public declaration for all to see. He was not just fighting for himself, he was fighting for her honor. His victory was her victory, his defeat her shame. It was a powerful and romantic gesture that bound them together in the eyes of the court. After the dust of the tournament settled, the celebration would move indoors to the feast. A castle's great hall, which could seem cold and imposing by day, was transformed at night. It was lit by the warm, flickering light of 1,000 candles, their glow reflecting off polished silver and sparkling jewels. The overwhelming smell of roasted meats, of exotic spices, of mulled wine and wood smoke filled the air. This was an opportunity for a family to display its wealth and sophistication. The quality of the food, the number of courses, the entertainment provided, all of it was a testament to their power and prestige. And in this setting, their most prized assets were put on display, their eligible children. A daughter would be dressed in the finest silks, her hair intricately braided. A son would be positioned to show off his courtly manners and wit. Even the seating arrangements were a form of communication. To be seated at the high table near the Lord was a sign of great honor. Where a potential suitor and his family were placed could signal the host's approval or disapproval of the potential match. It was a silent, political language that everyone present knew how to read. Amid the feasting and conversation, the minstrels would strike up a lively tune on their lutes and pipes. This was the signal for the dancing to begin. For a young couple in the midst of a courtship, this was a moment of rare and precious opportunity. Dancing was one of the very few times a man and a woman could have socially acceptable physical contact. To be able to hold a lady's hand, to guide her through the steps of a formal, circling dance on the polished floor, was a moment of intimacy in a world that allowed for almost none. It was a chance to exchange a few quiet words, to share a meaningful glance, all under the watchful eyes of the assembly. Of all the stages for this dance, the royal court was the grandest and most important. This was the ultimate marriage market, where the highest-ranking dukes, earls, and barons vied for the most advantageous matches in the kingdom. To be present at court was to be at the very center of power. When the monarch and their court went on progresses, traveling from one great castle to another throughout the country, they brought this glittering social stage with them, creating ripples of excitement and opportunity wherever they went. And while less formal, even religious events like major church festivals or pilgrimages could serve as accidental meeting grounds, offering a chance for families to interact in a slightly more relaxed but still very public setting. But one thing remained constant across all these venues. Everything was a performance. How you ate, how you dressed, how you danced, the cleverness of your conversation, every detail was subject to intense scrutiny. The goal was simple: to see and be seen, to assess and be assessed, all within the inescapable public gaze. It was a dazzling, exhausting, and absolutely critical part of securing one's future. While these public performances were unfolding, a powerful and deeply romantic ideology was shaping the very language of love and desire. This was the art of courtly love, a revolutionary code of conduct that seemed to stand in direct opposition to the practical, transactional nature of arranged marriage. It was a beautiful, idealized dream that coexisted with and provided an escape from a much harsher reality. This captivating new way of thinking about love did not spring from the church or the battlefield, but from the sophisticated and sun-drenched ducal courts of Aquitaine and Provence in the south of France during the 11th and 12th centuries. It was an idea championed and spread by some of the most powerful women of the age, most notably Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was first the Queen of France and later the Queen of England. At her vibrant court, poets, troubadours, and minstrels were treasured. They composed and sang songs and epic poems that celebrated a new kind of love. It was a love that was not based on land or lineage, but on personal devotion and admiration. Imagine a quiet evening in the castle. The gentle strumming of a lute fills the room as a troubadour sings a ballad, his voice telling a story of a knight's hopeless, all-consuming passion for a beautiful and noble lady. This was the sound of courtly love spreading through the medieval world. The central paradox of this ideal was that the love being celebrated was often unattainable, and sometimes even adulterous. The classic model of courtly love was not between a husband and wife. It was the secret, passionate devotion of a knight to a high-born lady who was almost always married to someone else. He would serve his lady from afar, performing great deeds in her name, content just to be worthy of her notice. The legendary tale of Lancelot and his love for Queen Guinevere, the wife of his king, Arthur, is the most famous example of this tragic and beautiful ideal. Their love was a secret that could never be fully realized, and this unfulfilled longing was seen as its purest expression. This idealized love was meant to be ennobling. It was believed that by dedicating himself to a lady, a knight would become a better man. He would be braver in battle, more chivalrous in his conduct, more virtuous in his soul. The love was not about physical consummation. It was about spiritual and moral improvement. A young knight, his face earnest in the firelight, would listen to these tales of legendary lovers and aspire to that same level of devotion. The key principles of this code were well known. The suitor would suffer from a love sickness, losing his appetite and his sleep for love of his lady. He would pledge absolute obedience to her every whim, no matter how trivial, and above all, their affection had to remain a closely guarded secret, adding to its thrill and its preciousness. Of course, the reality of life was very different from the poetry, but courtly love provided something essential for the men and women of the nobility. It provided a social script for interaction. In a highly restrictive world, it created a safe and acceptable language for flirting, for expressing admiration, and for navigating the complex relationships between the sexes. One could praise a lady's beauty or a knight's valor using the language of the poets, and it would be understood as a sophisticated compliment, not a crude proposition. You could have a wife chosen for you by your father to produce heirs and manage your alliance. But you could also have a lady, a distant figure of admiration, whose favor you sought to win at the tournament. This complex social game was even written down. A famous 12th century book by a man named Andreas Capellanus, called The Art of Courtly Love, attempted to list all the rules as if it were a formal code of law. It described how love could be acquired, how it could be kept, and the proper way for lovers to behave. The very existence of such a book shows how seriously this game was taken. The ideas of courtly love, born in the songs of troubadours, would go on to profoundly influence Western culture. The echoes of a knight kneeling before his lady can still be seen in our modern notions of romance, in the idea that love should be a transcendent and transformative experience. While the poets and troubadours sang of secret garden meetings and whispered confessions of love, the daily reality for a young noble couple was starkly different. Courtly love provided a script for their feelings, but the stage upon which they could perform was incredibly small and crowded. This was because of the almost complete and total lack of privacy in a medieval castle. Every interaction, every word, every glance was shaped by the constant presence of watchful eyes and listening ears. An unmarried noblewoman, from the time she was a young girl to the day of her wedding, was almost never left alone. Her constant companions were her chaperones. These were typically older, married, female relatives, a governess, or a group of trusted ladies-in-waiting. Their job was simple and absolute: to protect the young lady's reputation. They were a constant, silent, and often stern presence in the corner of every room. The sound of a disapproving cough from a chaperone could instantly end a conversation that was becoming too personal or a glance that was held for a moment too long. The very architecture of the castles made privacy impossible. These were not buildings with long corridors of private rooms. Life was lived communally. A great hall served as a dining room, a throne room, and a general meeting place for the entire household. Even sleeping arrangements were often communal, with lords and ladies sleeping in curtained beds in a main chamber, while their attendants slept on smaller beds or pallets on the floor nearby. The echo of footsteps in a stone corridor was a constant reminder that someone was always near, that you were never truly alone. This meant that any conversation between a potential couple was, by definition, a public event. It would be formal, polite, and most likely overheard by half a dozen other people. A suitor and a lady might be allowed to sit together in the deep recess of a window seat, but her ladies-in-waiting would be sewing just a few feet away. A whispered comment would be quickly cut short as a servant entered the room to tend to the fire. This intense scrutiny was a powerful mechanism of social control. A lady's virtue was her most valuable asset in the marriage market. Her family's honor was tied directly to her reputation. A single, private, unchaperoned meeting with a man could be grounds for a ruinous scandal, instantly ending any marriage negotiation and possibly rendering her unmarriageable. Even the places that seemed to offer a hint of seclusion were still under watch. A solar was a private sitting room for the lord and his family, a step up from the great hall. But a young couple would only be allowed there with family members present, who might be pointedly looking out the window or engrossed in a game of chess, but were listening to every word. The romantic idea of the walled garden, a common setting for love in poetry, was also an illusion of privacy. A stroll amongst the roses was permissible, but always within clear sight of chaperones watching from a window or a shaded bench. You constantly had the feeling of being watched. And it was not just the family and chaperones who were observing. The servants were everywhere. They stoked the fires, served the food, and made the beds. They were an invisible but ever-present part of the household, and they were the key conduits of the castle's gossip mill. Their observations of a stolen glance, a whispered word, or a secret meeting would be reported back to the lord or lady of the house with astonishing speed. This constant surveillance forced all meaningful communication underground. It had to become subtle, symbolic, and unspoken. It became a language of gestures, of held glances across a crowded room, and of hidden meanings tucked inside polite, formal phrases. The modern idea of dating, of two people getting to know each other through private conversation, simply did not exist. It was a concept as foreign as the stars. With private conversation all but impossible, how could a suitor express his genuine interest? How could a lady signal her favor? They had to rely on a different, silent form of communication, a rich and beautiful language made up of symbolic gifts and tokens. These objects became the stand-ins for whispered words and secret letters. They were a way to convey personal feeling in a world that did little to encourage it. The giving and receiving of these gifts was a crucial part of the courtship dance, filled with public meaning and private sentiment. One of the most common and significant tokens was a simple glove. A nobleman might present a fine leather glove to a lady as a sign of his admiration. If she accepted it, it was a clear signal of her favor. She might then carry this glove with her, or even wear it tucked into her belt for all to see. It was a public acknowledgement of his suit. A ring was an even more powerful symbol. The type of gemstone it held often carried a specific meaning, a silent message from the giver to the recipient. A ruby might signify a deep and burning passion, while a brilliant blue sapphire was a promise of fidelity and truth. The glint of a new gemstone on a lady's finger, seen under the candlelight of a feast, would send a clear message to all observers about the state of her courtship. One particularly beautiful and popular type of betrothal gift was the gimel ring. This was a ring made of 2, or sometimes 3, interlocking bands. When the couple was betrothed, they would each take one band and wear it. On their wedding day, the rings would be reunited on the bride's finger, forming a single, complete ring. It was a clever and elegant physical symbol of 2 lives joining to become one. An even more direct statement was a piece of jewelry, perhaps a brooch or a pendant, that was engraved with the suitor's family coat of arms. This was no mere romantic gesture. It was a powerful statement of serious intent, akin to a public and binding promise. In keeping with the ideals of courtly love, some of the most highly valued gifts were not material, but artistic. A suitor who could write a poem or compose a song for his chosen lady was demonstrating not just his affection, but his education, his sensitivity, and his refined nature. We can picture the scene. A young man, perhaps a little awkward and nervous, presenting a lady with a rolled-up parchment tied with a ribbon. It contains a poem he has painstakingly written for her. This was a high-status gift that separated the truly courtly suitor from one who could only offer wealth. The exchange was not one-sided. A lady had ways of showing her favor as well. She could give her chosen knight that precious favor to wear at the tournament. Or she might gift him a handkerchief that she herself had embroidered with delicate, colorful threads. This was a deeply personal gift, something she had spent hours creating with her own hands. For a knight, carrying such a token was a source of immense pride. It is important to remember, however, that not all gifts were so romantic. In many cases, they were simply expensive and transactional, meant to demonstrate the immense wealth of the giver's family. The acceptance or rejection of any gift was a critical and very public moment. If a lady accepted a significant token from a knight, it would cause a collective murmur to ripple through the onlookers. Her choice was now public knowledge. To reject a gift was an equally public and definitive statement, a polite but firm end to a suitor's hopes. In this constrained world, these precious objects did more than just sparkle. They spoke volumes. Of all the medieval courtship gifts we've talked about, a personal poem, a symbolic ring, a knight's favor won in a tournament, which one do you find the most romantic or meaningful? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. The public dance of courtship, with its vibrant tournaments and symbolic gifts, has reached its gentle end. A potential match has been made, favors have been exchanged, and the initial attraction, or at least acceptance, has been established. Now, the music fades, and the bright colors of the festival give way to a quieter, more serious mood. The time has come to move from the stage of performance to the chamber of negotiation. This is where the true foundation of the medieval marriage would be laid, not with poetry or romance, but with the precise and unyielding language of contracts, assets, and law. This critical phase was conducted far from the eyes and ears of the young couple themselves. They had played their part. Now, the patriarchs of their families, flanked by sober-faced legal advisors and clerks, would gather in a private room. Imagine a space paneled in dark wood, the only sounds being the low, serious tones of men's voices and the gentle scratch of a quill pen on dry, crisp parchment. Here, the romantic ideals of courtly love had no place. Here, marriage was treated as what it truly was for the nobility, a formal merger of two great houses. Every detail had to be meticulously planned and legally enshrined. At the heart of these discussions was the dowry. This was the wealth that the bride's family would pay to the grooms, a contribution to the new household, and a compensation for taking on the financial responsibility of the wife. The negotiation over the dowry was often fierce and protracted. It could include vast tracts of land, strategically important castles, large sums of money that clinked as they were counted out, herds of livestock, or even valuable household goods like silver plates and fine tapestries. A family's honor and prestige were reflected in the size of the dowry they could provide for their daughter. Equally important was the dower that would be set aside for his wife's exclusive use and support should she be left a widow. For the bride's family, securing a generous dower was non-negotiable. It was the ultimate safety net for their daughter, ensuring her financial security and status in a world that could be perilous for a woman alone. The arguments over which third of the lands would constitute the dower, which forests and which villages, could go on for weeks. Another fascinating element of the financial agreement was a Germanic tradition known as the Morgengabe, or the morning gift. This was a gift given directly from the husband to the wife on the morning after their wedding night, after the marriage had been consummated. This gift, which could be a purse of coins, a piece of property, or a fine jewel, became her personal and absolute property, separate from the dower. It was a token of his satisfaction and a recognition of her new status, a private financial acknowledgement that the union was now complete in every sense. A clerk would painstakingly write it all out in the formal Latin of the church and the law. The contract might even include specific clauses about the religious education of any future children, or where the couple was expected to live for the first years of their marriage. Once every term was agreed upon, the document would be signed and sealed. The sight of hot wax being dripped onto the bottom of the parchment and a heavy signet ring being pressed firmly into it was the moment the deal became official. The alliance was now legally binding. The bride's contribution was not only in land or coin. Her trousseau was also a key part of the arrangement. This was her collection of personal belongings, gathered over years, that she would bring to her new home. Imagine a young woman's beautifully carved and painted wedding chest. Inside would be the fine linens, the dresses of silk and wool, the jewelry, and all the personal effects she would need to begin her new life. These negotiations were methodical and slow. They could take months, sometimes even years, to finalize. But when the ink was dry and the seal was set, the path was cleared for the next great step. Once the ink on the heavy parchment contract is dry, and the financial and legal foundations have been secured, the union can be made official in the eyes of God and the community. This was not yet the wedding, but a ceremony that often carried even more legal weight. This was the betrothal. In our modern world, an engagement is a beautiful promise, but one that can be broken with a change of heart. In the medieval period, the betrothal, known formally as sponsalia, was a far more serious matter. It was a legally binding contract to marry in the future, and to break it was a grave offense with serious social and legal consequences. The ceremony itself was one of solemn public promise. It might take place in the soft light of a private family chapel or in the main solar of the castle. The couple, who might have spent very little time together, would be brought before their families and witnesses. Here, they would join hands, and in a clear voice, speak the vows of future intent. These vows were known as verba de futuro, or words of the future. The young man might say, "I will take you as my wife," and she would respond, "I will take you as my husband." It was a promise of a future act, but one that was now legally enforceable. As a symbol of this binding promise, a ring was often given. It was placed not on the left hand, as we do today, but on the right. This betrothal ring would be worn on the right hand throughout the period leading up to the marriage, a constant public symbol that this person was spoken for. On the wedding day, it would finally be moved to the left hand, completing the circle and the promise. The feeling of that cold, heavy gold ring slipping onto a finger for the first time was the feeling of a future being sealed. It was a tangible link to a person who was now inextricably part of their destiny. These betrothals could happen when the couple were very young, sometimes even infants. In these cases, the children would speak their vows with words coached by their parents, promising to marry once they reached the legal age of consent. It was a strange sight to see two small children formally bound together, their entire adult lives already charted for them. But for the noble families, it was a necessary step to secure an important alliance long before rivals could interfere. The ceremony was always a public event. The solemn expressions on the faces of the family members and witnesses were a crucial part of the ritual. Their presence ensured that the contract was valid and could be testified to later if any dispute arose. It was common for a father to physically place his daughter's hand into the hand of her future husband, a powerful and symbolic transfer of authority and protection. Unlike a modern engagement, this promise could not be undone easily. It required a formal legal process, almost like a miniature annulment, and a family that broke a betrothal contract would suffer a great loss of honor. The betrothal marked the moment when the couple were officially, though not yet sacramentally, a unit. Any romantic involvement with another person from this point forward would be considered a form of adultery, a betrayal not just of their future spouse, but of the entire allied family. It was the final, irreversible promise. After the solemn vows were spoken, the mood would often lighten. The alliance was cemented. The long and complex journey of courtship and negotiation had reached its climax. All that remained was to wait for the sacred day that would unite them forever. The promise has been made in the eyes of the law and the community. The contracts are sealed, the dowry is secured, and the betrothal ring sits on the bride's right hand. Now, a deep and peaceful sense of finality can settle over the proceedings. The day was less about a private, emotional union and more about a public, communal celebration of a new social reality. The morning often began with the sound of church bells ringing out across the town or the countryside, a joyful announcement to all that a marriage was taking place. The centerpiece of the morning's events was the procession. This was a grand public spectacle, a final display of the family's wealth and status before the union was sealed. Imagine a colorful train of people making their way through the streets. There would be musicians playing lutes and pipes, family members in their finest clothes, knights on horseback, and honored guests, all walking from the bride's family home toward the church. The bride herself was the jewel of this procession. She did not traditionally wear white. Instead, she would be dressed in her finest gown, made of the most expensive materials her family could afford. It might be a deep, rich blue, symbolizing purity, or a vibrant red, symbolizing fertility, often crafted from velvet or silk and embroidered with gold thread. Her hair, in a beautiful and significant tradition, was typically worn loose and flowing down her back. This was a symbol of her virginity, a sign of her maidenhood that would change after this day. Once married, she would wear her hair pinned up, a public marker of her new status as a wife. The wedding ceremony itself, in a fascinating departure from our modern customs, often took place not inside the church, but on the porch or at the main door. The cool stone of the church entrance formed a threshold between the secular world and the sacred. Here, in the open air and in full public view, the core of the ceremony would happen. The priest would be present, but his role was that of a witness and a guide who would bestow God's blessing. He did not marry the couple in the way we think of it today. The truly binding moment was the couple's own words. They had already spoken the words of the future at their betrothal. Now they would speak the verba di presenti, the words of the present, standing before their community. They would exchange their vows, saying, "I take you, ... double quotes. This present tense declaration of consent was the moment the marriage became a sacrament, the instant they married each other. After these vows were exchanged and the rings swapped to the left hand, a collective cheer or a happy sigh would rise from the crowd. The couple was now officially husband and wife, bringing their new union fully into the sacred heart of their faith. And after the solemnity of the church came the joy of the feast. A wedding feast was a massive public celebration that could last for hours or even several days. It was here that the new social alliance was joyfully affirmed. Guests would bring gifts, and the host families would provide an extravagant amount of food and drink, another demonstration of their power and generosity. The taste of spiced wine and roasted meats, the sound of music and laughter, all combined to create an atmosphere of pure celebration, reinforcing the new bonds that now tied the entire community together. As the long day of feasting and celebration begins to wind down, and a soft evening light settles over the castle, one final, and to our modern minds, very strange public ritual remains. This was the bedding ceremony, a custom that seems invasive to us, but was a logical and meaningful conclusion to the medieval marriage process. In a world where producing an heir was a matter of dynastic survival, this final step was of immense importance. The consummation of the marriage was a legal necessity. Without it, the union could, in theory, be annulled. The bedding ceremony was a public and formal acknowledgement of this crucial fact. As the feast ended, the bride and groom would not slip away quietly. Guests would follow them through the halls, the flickering torchlight casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. There would be laughter, jokes, and the singing of bawdy songs meant to encourage the new couple. It was a joyous, communal act of ushering them into their new life together. Upon reaching the bedchamber, a priest might be present to formally bless the wedding bed itself. He would sprinkle it with holy water, praying for the couple's health and, above all, for their fertility. Sometimes they would even be served a final cup of spiced wine or a small sweet cake by their guests as they lay in bed. Finally, with a last round of blessings and cheerful encouragement, the guests would depart. A heavy tapestry would be drawn across the entrance to the bedchamber, at last granting the couple a measure of privacy. It marked the end of the public performance and the true beginning of their private life. Though the act itself was private, the public nature of the procession leading up to it served as a form of social witnessing. The community had seen them to the threshold of their new life. For royal and high noble marriages, this ritual could be even more formal. The consummation of a king's marriage was a matter of state security. High-ranking witnesses might even wait in an antechamber outside the bedroom door, waiting for some sign or proof that the marriage was now complete and the succession was secure. The following morning provided the final bookend to the ritual. The husband's presentation of the morgen Jeb, the morning gift, to his new wife was the last quiet confirmation. It was a personal acknowledgement that their union, negotiated by their families and celebrated by their community, was now whole, sacred, and unbreakable. And so, with the final ritual complete and the castle falling into a quiet hush, our journey through the formal path of medieval courtship comes to a gentle close. We've seen that it was a world guided not by private romance, but by public duty, strategy, and community. From the first calculated glance across a feasting hall to the final blessing of the marriage bed, every step was a carefully choreographed dance. Thank you for joining me on this part of our story tonight. I hope this chapter has been relaxing and has given you a new perspective on the past. As you drift deeper into rest, our story isn't quite over. In our next part, we'll explore the quieter, more hidden stories, what happened when these rigid rules were broken, and where true love might have fit into this intricate world. Our journey through the structured world of medieval marriage has shown us a landscape of duty, alliance, and inheritance. We have walked the halls of power, where unions were forged like treaties, and we have seen how the lives of individuals were woven into the grand tapestry of their lineage. But now, our path takes a quieter, more reflective turn. We move away from the main narrative into the softer light of the epilogue to explore the exceptions, the complexities, and the quiet truths that lay hidden within the margins of this grand design. This is a time for calm consideration, a scholarly pause to wonder about the human heart. We will gently investigate the evidence of genuine love, the whispers of famous forbidden affairs, and the very different ways that ordinary people found one another. We will also discover the surprising agency of those who found freedom at the end of a marriage, not the beginning. Let us approach these stories not with urgency, but with a gentle curiosity, creating a space for a more nuanced and complete picture to emerge. The pace is slow now, the air is still. Let your mind settle as we explore the outliers. Did love, as we understand it, truly exist in this era? It is a question that hovers over any study of medieval life, a gentle but persistent inquiry into the emotional lives of those who came before us. The answer, much like the period itself, is not simple. It is a mosaic of different experiences, a quiet spectrum of feeling that cannot be captured by a single rule. While it is true that many, if not most, noble marriages were arranged with cold calculation, this was merely the beginning of the story, not its end. Affection, it turns out, was often a slow and steady growth, a resilient vine that could find purchase even on the stone walls of dynastic duty. Imagine, for a moment, two people brought together by their families. They are near strangers, their union a matter of contracts and land. Yet, through the shared passage of years, something could begin to change. The shared responsibility of managing an estate, the anxieties of childbirth, the profound grief of losing a child, and the simple, cumulative effect of daily existence could forge a powerful bond. Love was often seen not as the spark that ignited a marriage, but as a warm and steady flame that could be carefully tended and nurtured after the vows were spoken. It was a happy consequence of a good match, a welcome reward for duty fulfilled. To find evidence of this, we must look closely at the traces they left behind. Consider the delicate, faded ink on a surviving personal letter. These documents, so rare and precious, offer us a breathtakingly intimate glimpse into their world. Among the most remarkable of these are the letters of the Paston family, who lived in 15th century England. Their correspondence reveals a family deeply enmeshed in the practicalities of arranged marriages. Yet it also contains one of the most touching love stories of the age. The letters between Marjorie Bruce and John Paston III are a testament to genuine romantic feeling. In one famous letter, written as their marriage was being negotiated, Marjorie addresses John directly, calling him her right well-beloved Valentine. This was no mere formality. Her words are filled with earnest emotion, a heartfelt plea from a woman who has clearly given her heart to the man she hopes to marry. She writes with a vulnerability that cuts across the centuries, showing that passionate, personal love was not only possible, but very real. Beyond the intimacy of letters, we can find quieter clues in more formal documents. Wills, for instance, were typically pragmatic records of inheritance. Yet sometimes, amidst the legal language, a single phrase stands out. A husband might leave property to his beloved wife, providing her with more than the dower, which was the portion legally required for her support. This small addition, recorded for posterity, was a final, public declaration of a private affection, a testament to a bond that went beyond mere contract. And then there is the evidence we can see and touch, carved in silent stone. In quiet parish churches across Europe, tomb effigies depict husbands and wives lying side by side for eternity. Often, their hands are clasped. Imagine the smooth, cold stone beneath your fingertips, the stillness of the chapel, the faint light filtering through a high window. That simple gesture of holding hands, chosen to represent their union for all time, speaks volumes. It is a quiet but lasting symbol of their partnership and their affection. The celebrated writer Christine de Pizan offers another powerful voice. Writing in the early 15th century, she reflected on her own marriage, which she entered into at the tender age of 15. She describes it not as a burden, but as a source of profound happiness and companionship. Left a widow, she chose not to remarry, and her writings often celebrate the memory of her loving husband. Her experience reminds us that a woman's life was not defined solely by the transactional nature of her marriage vows. Slowly, over the course of the later Middle Ages, a different ideal began to gain ground: the concept of a companionate marriage. This was a union based not just on strategy, but on mutual affection, respect, and partnership. It was a subtle shift, but a significant one, suggesting a growing recognition of the importance of the emotional bond between spouses. Even within a system that often prioritized the practical, the fundamental human need for connection found a way to flourish. It was in the shared smile between an older couple watching their grandchildren play, or in the simple, heartfelt words carved into a memorial plaque. Love was there, quiet and persistent. Yet, while affection could certainly grow within the accepted rules of society, some stories are remembered precisely because they were defined by a choice to break them. These were the forbidden loves, the passionate affairs that defied convention and risked everything for a connection that society would not sanction. We will now reflect on these famous tales, not as simple scandals, but as profound expressions of a different kind of human experience. The story of Heloise and Abelard is perhaps the most famous and tragic of all medieval romances. In the bustling, intellectual world of 12th century Paris, Peter Abelard was a star. He was a brilliant philosopher and theologian, his lectures drawing crowds of eager students. Among them was a young woman of extraordinary intellect named Heloise. She was his student, and he her tutor. In the quiet, scholarly atmosphere of their lessons, a connection formed that was both intensely intellectual and deeply passionate. Their love was a secret, a flame burning brightly in the shadows of a society that had no place for it. Abelard was a cleric, expected to remain celibate. Heloise was a noblewoman, her future already planned. They ignored the rules, and their secret affair led to a secret marriage and the birth of a child. But such secrets could not be kept forever. When Heloise's furious uncle discovered the truth, his revenge was swift and brutal. Abelard was attacked and castrated, a violent end to his physical relationship with Heloise and his public career. In the aftermath, both were forced to retreat from the world, each entering a monastic life. He became a monk, she a nun, yet their connection endured. Their surviving letters are a testament to a love that could not be extinguished. They are extraordinary documents, filled with passion, regret, intellectual debate, and a longing that transcends the thick stone walls of their separate cloisters. Their tragedy became a legend, a powerful story of a love so profound that it challenged the very foundations of their world. While the tale of Heloise and Abelard was a stark reality, the medieval imagination was also captivated by fictional romances that explored similar themes. The legend of Lancelot and Queen Guinevere was one of the most popular stories of the age. It was the centerpiece of the Arthurian legends, a tale of a noble knight's adulterous love for the wife of his king. Imagine the moonlight shining into a castle window where secret lovers meet, their passion a betrayal of the most sacred oaths of loyalty. This story, and others like it, fascinated the medieval mind. It reflected a deep cultural interest in the idea of courtly love, a romantic ideal that often existed outside the bounds of marriage. Similarly, the tale of Tristan and Isolde captured the hearts of audiences across Europe. This story tells of a young knight and a princess who accidentally drink a love potion. They are then bound by an irresistible, magical love that overrides all their duties and loyalties. The potion serves as a powerful metaphor, suggesting a love so overwhelming that it is beyond human control. The beautiful illustrations in a surviving manuscript might show the two lovers in a garden, their faces turned toward each other, oblivious to the world and its rules. These stories, though often ending in tragedy, served a complex purpose. On one hand, they were cautionary tales, stark warnings about the dangers of giving in to passion and breaking social vows. On the other hand, they fed a popular desire for the very romance and deep personal connection that was often absent from the arranged marriages of the nobility. They allowed people to explore the intoxicating power of passionate love from a safe, fictional distance. Of course, forbidden love was not confined to the pages of romance. Royal courts were often simmering with intrigue and scandal. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of the Middle Ages, was a figure of legendary passion and will. Her first marriage, to the King of France, was unhappy, and she successfully had it annulled, a shocking act for the time. She then married the younger Henry, who would become King of England, a match that began in passion but descended into a bitter power struggle. Her life was a series of bold choices that defied the expectations placed upon a woman, even a queen. For those without Eleanor's power, however, the consequences of a forbidden love affair were dire. The punishments for adultery, especially for women, were severe and public. They could range from humiliating rituals of public shaming to being confined in a convent for the rest of her life. Imagine the heavy iron gates of a convent closing shut behind a woman forced to take the veil, her life forfeit for a single transgression. These harsh realities stood in stark contrast to the romanticized tales of legend. The stories of nobles, queens, and legendary lovers have echoed down the centuries, their passions and sorrows preserved in poems and letters. But their world was not the world of the vast majority. The historical record is often quiet about the lives of the common folk, but their approach to love and marriage was a world away from the strategic alliances of the great halls. To understand their lives, we must travel below the salt. This phrase refers to the seating arrangement in a medieval hall where the lord's family and honored guests sat at a high table, while commoners and servants sat at lower tables below the expensive salt cellar. For those living below the salt, the concerns of marriage were far more immediate and practical. Their unions were less about the merging of lands and titles, and more about the fundamental partnership required for survival. For a peasant or a villager, a spouse was not a political asset. A partner was chosen for their ability to contribute to the shared labor of life. A man looked for a woman who was strong, healthy, and skilled in running a household, churning butter, and tending a garden. A woman looked for a man who could work the land, repair a fence, and provide for a family. Their marriage was an economic unit, a team that would face the hardships of medieval life together. The smell of baking bread and fresh soil in a small village was the scent of their shared existence. Because their marriages had fewer political implications, there was often a greater degree of personal choice. Parents, having no vast estates or titles to leverage, were more likely to allow their children to follow their hearts, as long as the match was a practical one. Young people had opportunities to meet and get to know one another in the natural rhythms of village life. They met at lively market days, at church gatherings, and at the seasonal festivals that marked the turning of the year. Imagine a village fair filled with the sounds of laughter and the cheerful music of a fiddle. Here, a young man and woman might share a cup of ale, their conversation a quiet beginning to a courtship, or picture them leaning on a rustic fence as the sun sets over the fields, talking softly about their hopes for the harvest. These simple, unrecorded moments were the foundation of countless unions. Of course, their lives were still constrained. A serf was bound to the land, and if they wished to marry someone from a different manor, the lord often had to grant permission. This permission frequently came at the cost of a fee, a tax known as merchat, a constant reminder of their place in the feudal order. The dowry of a peasant girl was a world away from the chests of gold and deeds of land offered by a noble bride. Her contribution might be as humble as a cow to provide milk, a few essential pots and pans, or a small flock of chickens. These were not symbols of status, but practical goods that would help the new household to survive and, hopefully, to prosper. The exchange of gifts between the couple was also simple. A pledge of betrothal might be sealed with a hand-carved wooden cup or a sturdy leather belt. While the church encouraged public ceremonies, many of the poor entered into what were known as clandestine marriages. These were simply vows exchanged between a man and a woman without the presence of a priest or witnesses, though legally binding in the eyes of the church for much of the period. These private unions were frowned upon by authorities who sought greater control over the institution of marriage. For the couple themselves, however, the most important factor was not the approval of a distant bishop, but the acceptance of their own community. A public betrothal was a vital part of village life. It was often celebrated with a small feast, the whole village gathering to witness the pledge and celebrate the new couple. This community approval was essential, as a family could not survive in isolation. They relied on their neighbors for help during the harvest, for support in times of sickness, and for the shared social fabric that held their world together. In this context, love and affection were not luxuries. They were the very glue that held a marriage together through years of hard labor and uncertainty. A partnership built on mutual care and genuine regard was the most practical foundation of all. For women in this world, marriage represented the expected path. It was a transition from the authority of a father to the authority of a husband. But for some, the greatest measure of freedom and personal power they would ever know came not at the start of this journey, but after it had ended. In the quiet aftermath of loss, a widow could step into a role of surprising influence, a unique position that set her apart from nearly every other woman in medieval society. When a nobleman died, his widow was legally entitled to her dower. This was a portion of her late husband's lands and estates, intended to support her for the remainder of her life. Crucially, this property was hers to control. For the first time, a woman who had been a daughter and then a wife could become the head of her own household. She could manage her estates, collect rents, and oversee the agricultural work on her lands. She held a legal and economic power that was an extraordinary anomaly in the patriarchal medieval world. Imagine a woman dressed in the dignified black weeds of a widow. She is not a figure of pity, but of authority. See her confidently giving orders to the steward of her estate, or sitting alone in her private chamber, reviewing the household accounts by candlelight. When she enters the great hall, a respectful silence falls. She is the dowager, the matriarch, a figure of immense power within her domain. This newfound status made a wealthy widow an extremely desirable marriage partner. She was often pursued by numerous suitors, all eager to gain control of her lands and wealth through a new union. But here, the widow held a power she never had as a young girl. Unlike the heiress, whose marriage was decided for her, a widow had the legal right to refuse any and all proposals. Many did just for that. They chose to remain unmarried, preferring the independence and autonomy that their position afforded them. A widow might smile gently as she turns down a suitor's generous offer, savoring a freedom of choice that was previously unimaginable. She had fulfilled her duty to her family by producing heirs. Now, her life was her own. Some widows became powerful matriarchs, expertly managing the inheritances of their young sons until they came of age. They navigated the complex world of feudal politics, protecting their family's legacy and securing their children's future. Others used their unique freedom to pursue entirely new paths. We have already spoken of Christine de Pizan, who, after her husband's death, used her widowhood to become a professional writer, a career unheard of for a woman of her time. Her independence gave her a voice. This freedom was not absolute, of course. Powerful feudal lords were often wary of independent women controlling valuable lands, and might still try to pressure a widow into a marriage that served their own strategic interests. The rustle of legal documents that granted her control over her lands also made her a target. Yet, even under this pressure, she had more power to resist, more legal standing, and far more worldly experience than she possessed as a young bride. The very existence of the merry widow, as a recurring figure in literature and folklore, speaks to how society perceived this unique social position. She was often depicted as clever, independent, and in control of her own romantic and financial destiny. While often a caricature, this archetype reflects a cultural recognition of the genuine freedom that widowhood could offer. It was a strange paradox of the medieval world that a woman often had to experience the loss of her husband to finally gain control of her own life. As our gentle reflection comes to a close, we can see the medieval world of love and marriage in a new light. We leave behind these stories of secret loves, of village courtships, and of powerful widows. It becomes clear that the landscape of the human heart was far more complex and varied than any single set of rules could ever suggest. It was not a monolith of duty and transaction, but a living mosaic of public obligation and quiet, personal connection, of strategic alliances and deeply felt affection. The world we have explored was not a single story. It was 1,000 different stories, lived in the shadow of the great castles and cathedrals, in the heart of the bustling villages, and in the quiet solitude of the convent and the manor house. It was a world of duty and desire, of rules and the courage to break them. I hope this quiet contemplation has brought you some peace and has added new layers of depth to our shared journey into the past. Our final chapter now awaits, a gentle look at the rhythms of daily life that followed these unions. For now, just continue to relax and let your mind drift. And so our journey together reaches its final chapter. The great narratives of alliance, love, and lineage now fade into a gentle quiet. We leave behind the flow of events, the forward march of time, and instead, we settle into the soft and steady rhythm of a single, ever-repeating day. This is a time for deep relaxation, a final immersion into the atmospheric reality of a medieval household after the wedding vows have been spoken and a new life has begun. There is no story to follow now, only a world to inhabit. Let the pace of your breathing slow as we listen to the sounds, feel the textures, and breathe in the sense of a time long past. Our purpose here is to create a peaceful, immersive soundscape, a gentle tapestry of daily life that allows you to fully let go of the present and drift slowly, peacefully, towards sleep. Let the world outside fade away. There is only the here and now of a distant yesterday waiting to cradle you in its calm embrace. Imagine a great stone manor house or a castle, standing silent in the deep velvet dark that precedes the dawn. This structure is not merely a home. It is a living, breathing organism, a self-contained world, humming with a quiet, predictable energy. In these last moments of night, the only sound might be the sigh of the wind across the battlements, or the soft collapse of a log in the great hall's hearth, where embers still glow with a warm orange light. This entire household, a bustling community of family, servants, knights, and craftsmen, holds its breath, waiting for the first touch of the sun. This household is a massive and complex organization, run with more precision than a modern corporation. At its head are the Lord and Lady, the chief managers of this small kingdom. Their authority is the gentle but constant pressure that keeps everything in motion, ensuring the steady and unbroken rhythm of the day. They are supported by a hierarchy of officials, each with their own domain. There is the steward, who walks the fields in his mind even as he sleeps, responsible for the management of the entire estate, from crop yields to tenant rents. There is the marshal, whose world is the stables, the scent of horse and hay, and the health of every creature under his care. Within the walls, the chamberlain is the keeper of the household's wealth, managing the intricate finances and holding the keys to the stores of wine and spice. And in the quiet of the chapel, the chaplain tends to the spiritual life of this community, his prayers a constant, gentle undercurrent to the worldly tasks of the day. Life here is lived publicly, a shared existence that unfolds in the vast space of the great hall. This cavernous room is the heart of the household, where family, knights, and servants are a constant, flowing presence. The rhythm of life is not dictated by the ticking of a clock, but by the grand, slow turning of the earth. The rising of the sun is the first call to action, and its setting is the signal for rest. The day is given its shape by the steady chiming of a distant monastery bell, a sound that rolls across the fields, marking the hours for prayer and for meals. This sound is the true metronome of their lives, a peaceful and unwavering reminder of the passage of time. And just as the day has its rhythm, so too does the year. The seasons dictate the very pulse of the work. Spring is a time of gentle urgency, the smell of damp earth as the fields are plowed and planted with the promise of the future. Summer is a slow, warm breath, a time of tending and waiting, of watching the crops grow tall under the long sun. Autumn is the culmination, the busy, communal work of the harvest, gathering the bounty that will sustain them through the winter. And winter is a time of turning inward, of indoor crafts by the light of the fire, the air still and cold outside the thick stone walls. This household is a world unto itself, largely self-sufficient. From the kitchens, you can hear the gentle, rhythmic thump of a butter churn, a steady and comforting sound that has echoed through the mornings for generations. The warm, wholesome smell of bread baking in the great stone ovens drifts through the corridors, a scent that promises nourishment and security. At dusk, the lowing of cattle can be hearing, a soft and gentle sound as they are brought in from the pastures for the night. This is a community that provides for itself, from the ale brewed in its own brewhouse to the cloth woven in its own chambers. Hospitality is a sacred duty, and the household must always be ready to welcome guests. Travelers, messengers, and other nobles are received with formal grace, their arrival a brief and welcome disruption to the steady routine. For a time, the community expands, its rhythms adjusting to accommodate the visitors before settling back into its familiar pattern once they depart. As the first light touches the sky, this sleeping giant begins to stir. The great hall, empty and quiet moments before, will soon fill with the sounds of the new day, the center of this small, intricate, and deeply peaceful world. And within this world, the lady of the household awakens to her own distinct and vital domain. The lady's day begins in stillness, in the quiet solitude of the private chapel. As the first pale light of morning filters through a high window, her morning prayers are a gentle anchor, a moment of peace before the complex responsibilities of her day unfold. She is not a lady of leisure, but a manager of immense skill, the central pillar of the household's domestic life. As she moves through the castle in the early hours, The soft rustle of a heavy set of iron keys hanging from her belt is a constant reminder of her authority. These keys open the storerooms, the spice chests, and the linen presses. She alone controls the precious resources that keep the household running. Her first duty is to oversee the staff. She consults with the cook in the kitchens, where the fires are already burning, planning the day's meals and ensuring that the supplies are sufficient. She inspects the laundry, the dairy, and the nursery, her keen eye missing nothing. Her management is not one of harsh commands, but of quiet, steady direction, ensuring that every member of her staff knows their task, and that the great machine of the household runs smoothly and without friction. While the great hall is the public heart of the castle, her personal domain is the solar. This was the private living quarters for the family, a comfortable refuge from the constant activity elsewhere. It is her responsibility to make this space a haven of warmth and beauty. She directs the placement of richly woven tapestries on the cold stone walls, their vibrant scenes telling stories of hunts and romances. She chooses the fine furnishings and ensures the rooms are filled with the gentle comforts of home. A significant part of her day, and that of the women who attend her, is spent overseeing the production of cloth. In the ladies' chamber, the air is filled with the soft click-clack of looms and the gentle hum of spinning wheels. This is not idle work. It is a vital industry, producing the linen and wool needed for the clothing, bedding, and hangings for the entire community. There is a quiet focus in the room, the shared rhythmic work creating a peaceful and productive atmosphere as the lady teaches her daughter the delicate art of fine needlepoint. The lady of the manor is also the household's primary healer. She possesses a deep knowledge of herbal remedies, passed down through generations. In a sunny window of the solar, bunches of herbs are left to dry, their fragrant scent filling the air. The sharp scent of rosemary for memory, the calming aroma of lavender for sleep, the clean fragrance of thyme for coughs. When a child falls ill or a servant is injured, it is the lady who is called. Her skill with salves, poultices, and soothing teas is the first and often only line of medical care available. Education, especially that of her daughters, is one of her most important duties. In the quiet afternoons, she might sit with her children, patiently guiding them through the letters of the alphabet in a precious, handwritten psalter, or teaching them the complex skills of household management they will one day need. Her voice is a soft and steady presence, shaping the next generation. And when all her duties are attended to, she may find a few precious moments for herself. Her leisure might be spent walking in the walled garden, a place of peace and beauty, or reading from a rare and valuable book. Sometimes, the gentle melody of a lute can be heard drifting from a sunlit room, a quiet and beautiful sound that speaks of a moment of personal peace. Her role is one of constant, gentle vigilance. But should her husband be called away to war or to court, her responsibilities magnify. She then becomes the master of the estate, expected to manage its affairs and even command its defense. She is the calm, steady center of the domestic sphere, the one whose quiet work ensures that the tapestry of daily life is woven without a single dropped thread. And while she manages the inner world of the castle, her husband's life and responsibilities lie primarily in the world that exists outside its protective walls. The Lord's day begins in much the same way as his wife's, with the quiet ritual of morning prayers. This is followed by a substantial breakfast in the great hall, breaking his fast with bread, cheese, and ale. preparing him for the physical and mental demands of the day ahead. His life is a careful balance of justice, administration, and military readiness, all performed with a steady and authoritative calm. One of his most significant duties is to hold court for his tenants. In the great hall, a respectful silence falls as villagers and farmers bring their disputes before him. One man might accuse another of moving a boundary stone, or a woman might complain of a straying animal damaging her garden. The Lord listens patiently to each side, his judgment serving as the law of the land for these minor affairs. His role is to be the dispenser of justice, the steady hand that maintains peace and order among the people who depend on him. Much of his morning may be spent in conference with his steward and the reeve, who is the chief official of a village. Together, they review the estate's accounts, plan the seasonal work for the farms, and discuss the maintenance of buildings and fences. This is the work of a chief executive, ensuring the long-term prosperity and stability of his domain. But his work is not confined to indoor meetings. A good lord knows his land intimately. Much of his time is spent on horseback, the creak of saddle leather, a familiar sound as he rides across his lands in the early morning mist. He inspects the progress of the crops in the fields, he assesses the health of the trees in his forests, and he ensures the boundaries of his property are secure. This physical presence on the land is a powerful symbol of his ownership and his commitment to its well-being. The afternoon is often dedicated to activities that are both sport and practice. Hunting is not merely a pastime for the nobility. It is essential training for warfare, honing the skills of tracking, riding, and archery. It also provides a welcome supply of fresh meat for the great hall's tables. A hunt is a display of skill and precision, a focused and often quiet affair that takes place in the deep woods. Falconry is another noble pursuit, a silent partnership between man and bird. The sound of a hawk's cry as it is released from a gloved wrist, soaring into the sky, is a sound of aristocratic grace and power. Back within the castle walls, the lord must maintain his martial skills. In the practice yard, known as the tilt yard, the rhythmic clang of steel on steel can be heard as he trains with his knights and men-at-arms. This is not the chaotic violence of battle, but a disciplined and steady practice, their movements choreographed and precise, keeping their bodies strong and their skills sharp. This constant readiness is essential, for the lord is responsible for the defense of his lands, and he owes military service to his own king or overlord in times of war. As evening approaches, he returns to the great hall for the main meal of the day. Seated at the head of the high table, he presides over his entire household. This meal is a demonstration of his wealth and generosity, a time for him to reward his followers and reinforce the bonds of loyalty that hold his world together. His presence is the anchor of the community, a symbol of the order and authority upon which their lives depend. His day is a constant rhythm of interconnected duties, ensuring the safety and prosperity of his lands and his people, all to secure the ultimate purpose of his union, the continuation of his line. And so, we come to the quietest and most hopeful corner of the medieval household, the nursery. Here, in a warm, firelit room, the future of the lineage is cradled and cared for. In an age when infant mortality was tragically high, the survival of a child through their earliest years was a source of profound and quiet joy. The purpose of the great marriage alliances, the careful management of the estate, and the constant readiness for war all find their meaning here. in the peaceful breathing of a sleeping child. For their first few years, noble infants were often placed in the care of a wet nurse, a woman chosen to breastfeed and care for the baby. The nursery was a world dominated by women, run by a team of nurses and ladies in waiting, all under the watchful and loving supervision of the lady of the household. The air here is filled with the soft sounds of lullabies being sung to soothe a restless child, a gentle and timeless melody. Childhood in this world was filled with simple wonders. Toys were not elaborate, but they sparked the imagination. You might hear the gentle clatter of a wooden toy knight on the stone floor, or see a little girl cradling a doll made from scraps of cloth and wool. Boys played with miniature swords and shields, their games a playful imitation of the adult world they would one day join. A child's laughter, echoing in a walled garden, is a sound of pure and simple happiness that transcends the centuries. But childhood was also short. By the age of 7, a child's life would begin to follow a more formal path of education and training, preparing them for the specific role they were born to play. The household chaplain might take on the task of teaching the children to read and write, using the sacred texts of the Psalter as their first primer. For the boys, this formal education would soon be supplemented with practical training. They would be sent to the stables to learn to ride, and to the armory to learn the basics of weaponry. Their journey to knighthood would begin in these early formative years. The girls, however, would remain in the domestic sphere by their mother's side. The patient voice of their mother would guide their hands as they learned to stitch a simple pattern, the first step in mastering the complex art of needlework. They would learn about herbs, about managing servants, and about all the intricate skills needed to one day run a great household of their own. The entire purpose of their upbringing was to prepare them to take their parents' place, to continue the family line, and to safeguard the inheritance for generations yet to come. The great cycle of life, the central theme of our story, is made real in their education. And as night falls over the castle, the household slowly settles into a deep and peaceful quiet. The children are sleeping soundly in their beds, safe within the thick stone walls. The fires are banked, the dogs are quiet, and a profound stillness descends. The day is done, its rhythms complete, and all is at rest, waiting for the sun. And with the gentle rhythm of the medieval household, the quiet breathing of sleeping children, and the peaceful knowledge that the sun will rise to begin the cycle anew, our time together tonight comes to a soft and final end. We have traveled far from the grand spectacle of the tournament to the quiet intimacy of the family home. Thank you so very much for allowing me to be your guide on this journey into the past. Your presence here, listening along, makes this community so very special. If you've enjoyed our time together and feel so inclined, a simple like or subscribe helps our channel find others who might enjoy these stories. But for now, all that's left to do is rest. There are no more stories to tell tonight, only peace. Let the quiet of the past soothe your mind, and allow yourself to drift into a deep and restorative sleep. Sleep well, and may your dreams be peaceful. Good night.